Nice. Okay, I'm gonna get out Grant in here. Cool. Grant should be heading in here soon. What's up, everyone, for popping along here? We're going to be talking about our newest paper on Rhodiola, Rosea, the supplement. We just had this lit review published. You're the legend, Dino. You're the legend, my friend. This paper published. This is a literature review. So this is not an original study. So we took all the research that's out there, analyze it all, and then publish it, which is kind of synthesizing what's out there. And so Rhodiola is something that I've been using for a long time. I talked about it a little bit on my guest series on Andrew Huberman's platform, and there's a lot of positive stuff. Nothing's perfect, though, so there's some applications, and there's some conflicting evidence, and so kind of the hope was to continue on this mission I've had my entire career, which is to help disseminate science communication and get stuff out there. So it's one thing to publish the research, which, by the way, it's open access, which means it's free. All of y'all can go there and read everything. Grant Tinsley, who's going to be on here kind of any second, he is the first author, and his writing style is beautiful. He's incredibly, there we go. Boom, there we go. So hopefully I did this correct. Okay, there he is. There's the man. There's Grant.
Hey, Andy, how's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Looks
I
like
don't know if you can see me.
audience...
I cannot see you yet.
Can't see me yet? I can see you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can see a black screen and I can hear you. So
interesting. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe you want to pop back off, or anybody else help us figure out what's going on, because I can see you perfectly.
Hey, I can proceed. I can proceed with the melodious sound of your voice. But if you want, I can jump off and jump back on and see if we can get it.
Yeah, if there's anybody else out there, maybe the Dean says T can see you, so I think the world can see you. The world can see you both. So we're gonna roll with what it is,
Hey.
man. I was just telling the world about how much I love your writing style. The paper is so incredibly easy and flowing to read. You don't have to have a super technical background, and so I encourage people. You went out of your way to pay and to make sure that this thing is open access, so it's not behind a paywall. So not only is it free for people to get, but it's very approachable and easy to read on their end. So we would generally encourage everyone to go read the whole darn thing. But we're going to cover a lot of the stuff, including things like some of the research that showed no benefit, no effect. It's not here to just support it. We really want to just kind of cover what you uncovered, rather, how much to take, when to take it, and just a bunch of other stuff. So that all sound like a good game plan to you, Grant?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. Fantastic. Let's super quick. I'll give the world here who's not familiar with you a little bit of your background. You're a tenure professor at Texas Tech. You've probably got, 150 publications in the area of sort of sports nutrition, human performance?
North of 100. Haven't hit 150 yet, but something to aspire to.
Yeah. Just all over the place. You've done a ton of research on intermittent fasting, body composition, supplementation. Those are really your areas of expertise, but anything human performance exercise-wise is in your wheelhouse. I know that's a very short synopsis of you, but anything else you got to add there to help people understand kind of who you are, and if they want to follow more your stuff, and what would they be getting into?
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much got it. I mean, primarily I'm an academic researcher. I do teach classes in our PhD program, master's program, undergrad program. I do a little bit of consulting and other things on the side, but the lion's share of my work is academic research. So I love this stuff. I certainly try to practice what I preach, love slinging some steel out in the garage gym, walking the walk and all of that. But happy to be chatting with you. Happy to get into this topic and anything else that comes up.
All right, great. One last check here, everyone. Audio's good. Can you let us know, I guess, in comments? I am kind of scrolling these ones down here. Let us know if anything comes out, but it looks good on my end. So we're going to proceed I want to ask and kind of tee you up for a bunch of different things. People asked some questions earlier on Twitter, and if I saw this, you actually just sort of restarted your Twitter. Grant, is that right?
Yeah, I was away for a few years. I did just to disseminate research. That's a lot of what I do on Instagram as well, is just share research from our lab. So I did decide. I know there are a lot of academics and other, just health conscious people who are on Twitter more so than Instagram to locate some of these articles, get access to them, and so on. So I did, after a couple-year hiatus, just for practical reasons, did resume with the retweet about our Rhodiola rosea article. So I'll try to share more regularly on there. And then Instagram as well is where I primarily share our research.
Yeah, great. And Grant's a great follow, way more active, publishes a lot more than I do. But again, uses his social media pretty much for science communication like I do. So you're pretty much going to see, and occasionally some pictures of him deadlifting in his garage. You're going to see those too.
You have to show the people that you walk the walk. That's what it's for,
Yeah, for sure. All right, great. Thank you for the feedback, everyone. Looks like the audio and video is awesome. So, Grant, what I want to start off with first is let's cut to the very chase here. I've been an advocate of Rhodiola myself many years, used it a lot. Obviously, in the scouring of the research, we found some use cases where it maybe has the most benefit, and then other cases where it's like, no, maybe it's not doing anything here. The results are mixed. So let's start with the proactive stuff. In the papers you were able to pull up, what's kind of like the most charitable case for Rhodiola rosea? What's going to have what type of activities? Does it promote the best? What use case scenario? And then we'll kind of walk our way all the way down to the things that are like maybe it doesn't work or we don't know. And then even the things that are like, hey, there's been a lot of research on this and it just doesn't do anything in this area. So kind of just walk us through that big picture if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and I'll give some context. So
Please.
For those who are listening aren't familiar, we were looking at the effects of Rhodiola rosea supplementation in humans primarily. We do have a section on, kind of by way of background, on rodent research, just talking about some of the potential mechanisms and the rationale for some of this human work. We were looking at exercise performance and I would say exercise relevant outcomes. So we didn't cover the full spectrum of everything that Rhodiola has been studied for because it is very broad. But with that said, we did try to approach it fairly broadly within the realm of exercise relevant outcomes. So what I'll mention first is related.
There, actually,
yeah,
I forgot
absolutely.
that part. That's actually very important. For this paper, we were not looking at anything in the medical or any other. This was strictly, if you take this as a human, is this going to enhance exercise performance? And so, thank you for that, because that is a big thing. There's a lot of other reasons why you may use it or look up other research. So to give you some numbers, how many papers were included in our analysis?
Yeah, so for the human trials, there were 16 that we located. And for those who are into research methodology, we didn't approach this as a formal systematic review, but we tried to use fairly systematic procedures. I personally like to do that even when I'm writing a narrative review, which I like the flexibility that you have in a narrative review to sort of go where the literature leads and kind of knit together a cohesive dialogue. But we still try to approach this in a fairly systematic way, meaning there are certain databases we're using, there are certain terms. We're certainly not cherry picking anything. We're trying to find any relevant article we can locate and include that. So again, not formally a systematic review in terms of how we registered it and proceeded, but we did try to use systematic procedures rather than just kind of, pulling out the most exciting studies and talking about those.
So if you were to put a number, how many papers do you think in general have been done in humans on Rhodiola, if we counted the other stuff? If you counted things like that, is that 200? Is that 7,000? Like, it's not creatine. It's not tens of thousands.
It's not creatine. I would be surprised if it reached the thousands, but I would say certainly in the hundreds. And I don't know definitively because we really did narrow in early on, focusing on these exercise relevant outcomes. So once we looked at, so not only just exercise humans, we were looking at Rhodiola rosea in isolation. So there may be a time and place for multi-ingredient supplements, but that certainly limits our ability to make inferences about Rhodiola specifically. So we narrowed it down to studies using Rhodiola rosea in particular, without other co-supplementation. So given all those kind of criteria, we ultimately had 16 trials with, I think it was 363 total participants that were included kind of in this overall narrative that we crafted.
Okay, great. So a little bit of context there. If we included, the 16 trials, this is maybe representing 10% at most of the research on humans and Rhodiola rosea. Like if there were probably more like 1 to 2% of the things. And so it really is confined specifically. This is a very big key. When people ask things like, does rhodiola work?
Yeah.
Like, remember, folks, like, we're representing 1%, maybe 2% of the total available research, but that's the only way you could do these things, right? Because we are really focusing on just, does it help exercise performance? So I think we've qualified that enough, unless there's anything else you got to say on that point, but I think we can jump into it.
No, yeah, I think we're good. We're good to roll into it. So, so we can start with the exercise performance outcomes, and there's lots of nuance. There's lots of caveats. We can get into those things if we want, but it's nice when you have reviewer comments that actually help you, improve the paper in a meaningful way. So we do have, I'll say, for anyone who wants to see this kind of in sort of long form, if you look at section 4 of our paper, which again, this is open access, it really gets into the practical strategies. So we sort of approach this. If you already know you're going to use rhodiola, this would be what we would view as the evidence-based way to do this. Again, they're mixed results on some of these outcomes, but we roughly separated.
Let me restate that more plainly, in case somebody just hopped on or whatever. You went out of your way in section 4 of the paper specifically to write a practical application, which covers how much to take, what type, when to take it, do you have to cycle it every day? Like all those things is specifically in the paper already, and it's all open access, which means it's not behind any paywall. Anyone in the world, you can go grab that, pull that up, read that section, and it's going to walk you through. If you want to take rhodiola, we're not saying you maybe should or shouldn't, whatever, but if you wanted to, you can go right to that thing. So if you want to skip this entire Instagram live, and you're like, yo, I'm sold. How much do I take? When do I take it? Just go to section 4. Grant already wrote it all up based on the evidence and based on the literature. That's as direct and plain as we can be there.
Yes, with the minor caveat that there's some items, for example, sex differences, where we essentially say the literature is limited enough that we can't really put forth a recommendation. The majority of these trials were in males. There were a couple in mixed sex, but without sex-specific analysis. This is just an example. So we'll say when we think that we can't actually make a judgment call on, for example, sex differences or something like that. Yeah. So there are the practical applications to the extent we felt like the literature allowed them at this point.
Which is actually a great point. If it's not in that section, it's because of what you just said. There just wasn't enough evidence for us to make a recommendation. So if you're like, you forgot X and X, no, we didn't. We put everything in there that if there's papers on it. So that's the best we could do. No. Maybe in a follow-up or later we could get you to espouse on what you personally think for situations where it's not covered by the research. But, put your coaching hat on a little bit. But for now, that's in the paper. If you want to know, just give me the science. What's the science say? That's already there for you.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So getting into some of the exercise outcomes. So I'll say something that's interesting about this. We sort of split generally the exercise outcomes into categories that maybe won't be a surprise to anyone, but looking at things more on the endurance, performance, and capacity end of the spectrum, and then on the more strength and power end of the spectrum. Something that I found really interesting about the literature is the doses are very different that have been used. So ultimately, when we get to the doses that we might recommend for each of these, it's really based on the literature, but the literature itself has used very different doses consistently. So on the endurance side, relatively lower doses have been used from, say, sub 200 milligrams up to, I think the higher ones are around 680 milligrams.
Yeah, exactly.
And the studies that did show benefits on the endurance side typically used about 200 milligrams of Rhodiola rosea or higher. Most commonly, it was standardized to about 1% solidroside and about 3% rosavins.
Yep.
And then in the acute setting, typically administered about an hour before exercise. So not unanimously beneficial, but when there were benefits seen for things like cycling, time to exhaustion, and time trial performance, that's kind of where we saw it. So again, about 200 milligrams of Rhodiola rosea or higher, and the 1% solidroside, 3% rosavins an hour pre-exercise. What's interesting when you look at the strength and power side, again, the full spectrum that we saw studied was from, say, sub 200 milligrams up to 680 milligrams or so on the endurance side. There are fewer trials on the strength and power side, but they all used higher doses. So I believe 3 of the 4 main trials we discussed used 1.5 grams of Rhodiola rosea. And this was
1,500
typically
milligrams.
through split.
Yeah.
Yes, 1,500 milligrams. Yep.
Yep.
So whereas this, we're down with an upper, dose we saw of around 600 to 700 milligrams on the endurance side. Almost all the doses are double that higher end on the strength and power side. Some of that may have to do with the recency. Some of these trials on resistance exercise outcomes and say like power production on, say, a cycling test like a Wingate test. Some of these are newer and maybe like pushing into higher doses. But that was where personally I thought some of the research was a little more promising. It is more limited in number, but there were benefits that I was a little bit more impressed with on the strength and power side. A big caveat here is like when you look at our paper, you'll see, and we try to state this clearly, but you'll see then when we're recommending the dose for strength and power outcomes, if you are going to take it, again, not saying that you would need to, but typically those benefits were seen with that 1,500 milligram per day dose, including 500 milligrams within the hour pre-exercise. So you could look at this at face value and say like, oh, do you need a much higher dose for strength and power outcomes? And it may look like that face value, but again, we try to state it clearly. That's really just because of what the literature has looked at. The literature has looked at lower doses, low to moderate doses on the endurance end of the spectrum, and then a decent amount higher doses on the strength and power end of the spectrum.
Yeah, which another way to say that is, I don't know if we saw any papers who've looked at strength, power, or hypertrophy at 300 milligrams. It's not that not the studies have looked at it and found it didn't work. They haven't done it yet. So the ones that have tried it have used 1,500 mgs or something like that, and you saw some stuff. So it might work at 750. It might work at 100. I don't know. But that's different than having been studied and shown to not be as effective. Nobody that I know has done any sort of global dose curve, right? 100, 200, 300, 500, 700, etc. up. You didn't see anything like that even in animal models. Did you for performance?
No, I think not for performance. I think there were a few toxicology studies that did that. But you're exactly right. And that's one of our main future directions, that we talked about in there was we need dosing protocols really on both sides because we've stuck to high doses on strength and power. We've stuck to low to moderate doses on the endurance. So we really need those dosing protocols for all our exercise outcomes because we really don't know. We don't know if that high of a dose is actually necessary for strength and power. We don't know exactly where the optimal dose is still on the endurance end of the spectrum. So we do need really large, rigorous dosing studies for really all exercise outcomes still to kind of nail down where the optimal dose would be.
Yeah, okay, man, love it. Hopefully everyone's finding this helpful. I wrote the paper. I'm still finding this helpful. You wrote the paper, and I'm still finding
I have the paper right here, though. There's a lot in there, so
yeah. So hopefully everyone's enjoying this and getting something out of it. If you look at most manufacturers, 100 milligrams per capsule is about standard. I know that's what they did with in Momentous. You guys obviously are aware of my conflict of interest working with Momentous, so I always like to get that out there. You can get it in a number of places, so it doesn't matter. Get it wherever you want if you want to use it. But 100 milligrams is pretty normal, and so people would, if you want to take 200 or 300, you take 2 or 3 capsules of it. I don't really know of many places who make much lower dose than that, but you could probably find it, especially in multi-ingredient mixes. You could find it at 50 milligrams or something like that. But that's a standard number. So if you think about that, you would have to take 15 of those pills to get to that 1,500, which is probably like outside the scope of realistic.
Yeah.
I don't know about you there.
Yeah.
And the timing was important, right? So again, it had to be in that in fact, was there any research? I don't think so. There was no papers that used it like immediately post-exercise, like 5 minutes, something like that, right? It's all 45 minutes to 60 minutes prior to exercise, right?
Yeah. So it would either be prior to exercise or be chronic supplementation, sort of either with no respect to exercise or chronic supplementation, but still giving a pre-exercise dose. And you're exactly right. I should mention on the 1,500 milligrams, most of those studies only use this dose for 3 days, followed by a 500 milligram dose pre-exercise, kind of on the 4th day prior to exercise testing. And there were several studies that were kind of they would cite the previous study and use their protocol. A couple are from the same lab group, so it makes sense we're seeing this similar kind of form of dosing protocol. But this was not taking 1,500 milligrams a day in perpetuity. This was a short, it was a acute trial, even though they had a couple days sort of loading. So it's even possible that it was that 500 milligram pre-exercise dose that was causing some of these effects. So yeah, certainly things to consider.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. What we don't have clear evidence, and some of you have asked this. I am reading the questions down there, but some of you have asked us. What do we know about year-long, 5-year-long, 10-year-long? In terms of exercise performance, there's no data on that whatsoever. In fact, there's very limited data on even 6 weeks, 8 weeks, that kind of stuff, right? Maybe you can break that down. But the overwhelming majority here is really
I believe the longest trial. Oh, sorry, what's that?
I was just gonna say the overwhelming majority of stuff you're talking like protocols like you just talked about, 2-3 days of a loading period and then a test, like very short term.
Yes, and there were many that were just single dose. I think the longest study that was included was 38 days. So for many of us who may be prospective supplement consumers, we're usually looking for something we might consume longer than 38 days. So
Right.
we definitely need longer term trials. There are a few ones we considered chronic. We kind of had a cutoff of about a week. So things under a week, like these 3-day protocols, single dosing, we consider those acute within the context of this literature and say longer than about a week as chronic, but it's not truly chronic relative to how many consumers would use these long term.
Yeah. And so it's possible that this could cut either way. So in other words, it's possible serving size like Momentous, 100 milligrams, maybe take that every day for 6 weeks and you might start to see benefit effect. It's also possible it's not anything besides the acute high dose. So smaller dose over time might do nothing whatsoever. Like we in terms of exercise performance, we don't know that. It just really hasn't been studied.
Yeah. And there were, say on the strength and power side, this was in untrained participants. So, take a little bit with a grain of salt if you're exercise trained. But there were studies that were several weeks long, say about a month long, where they did see some improvements in actual adaptations in terms of strength, power, repetitions to failure, and so on. Again, those with a relatively high dose still of rhodiola. But worth considering. There were some chronic trials in there, but again, just fairly short-term chronic trials.
With the longer-term trials, what's the highest dosage you saw, and did you see any evidence, I can't remember any, of adverse effects? In other words, like, I don't think there's any downside we saw of taking 500 milligrams a day.
Yeah, so the highest dose in a chronic study is 2,400 milligrams for 30 days. That's the study I was just referring to.
Yeah.
The caveat is it had a lower concentration of solidroside. So it was 0.5% solidroside. So it was essentially half the concentration of solidroside of common preparations. Some are even higher than that 1%. And I believe they also did not disclose the Rosea concentration, if I remember correctly. So this is a critical, important point. We have this in the application section 4 of the paper. But ideally, you'd certainly want a supplement that would disclose the concentration of Rosea and solidroside. Those are thought to be two of the main bioactive compounds. However, there are over 100 bioactive compounds that have been identified from Rhodiola rosea. So future research may even branch out and say, we're standardizing to these two particular bioactives, but there might be others that end up being, equally important or cumulatively important in concert with each other. So again, 2,400 milligrams per day for 30 days was the highest we saw here. No, there were not safety concerns. We have a we have a paragraph about this in our discussion. It was beyond the scope of the research to detail like all the mechanisms that could be involved in this, but we cite some research from not from these exercise trials directly, though these also support that, just supporting a good safety record of rhodiola. It's been used for a very long time. We discussed that a little bit too, that its history of use is very long. And this is common for some of these herbal compounds where they've been used for hundreds or thousands of years, with a good safety record from this kind of collective anecdote. But we do also have some peer-reviewed research supporting that as well.
Yeah, amazing. We've gotten actually a lot of questions before we logged on about mechanisms. Yeah. I don't want to do that right now. You can go read the. Can you give a 30-second answer to like mechanistically? This is not a stimulant like caffeine. It's not an anabolic agent like growth hormone like that. Can you just give people a very quick understanding of would this plausibly working out mechanisms, but like what's the most plausible scenario here in which this could benefit exercise performance?
Yeah, it's going to be very broad because the specific mechanisms are not well characterized. But The general idea, and we may get into other outcomes, which will help kind of develop this point, but the general idea is that this is an adaptogen. We included the term adaptogen in the title. That's often why people are thinking of rhodiola. But the idea is it's a compound that essentially increases your ability to resist physiological stress. It increases your ability potentially to maintain homeostasis. So that's really the goal of physiology in many ways, maintaining homeostasis, or to return to homeostasis after you've had some perturbation to your system. So some stressor that's occurred physiologically, maybe psychologically. That's not what we got into in this paper. But that would be the broad idea, is that this is adaptogen, causes you to be able to adapt better to these stressors. But in terms of the detailed mechanisms, we do cite some work. There's a little bit on the rodent side that might inform that a bit in the context of exercise. But overall, I would categorize it still as not very well characterized, partially because of the very large number of bioactive compounds that are included in rhodiola. And also give the caveat, I'm primarily an applied researcher, so we certainly focused on applied exercise and exercise relevant outcomes here.
Yeah, in general, I don't give a shit about the mechanisms if it doesn't work, right? Like, I don't care. Yeah. If it works, then I start to care. But first, I wanted to know, is it actually going to improve performance? And then, okay, let's start figuring out how it's working. But if it's not doing anything, then I don't really care at all.
It's fair.
You'll hear the term adaptogen and cortisol modulator, things like that thrown around. So there's actually an interesting discussion about whether or not this is a good idea. So the light here we can compare is cold water. And so, for example, one of the things that we know is antioxidants. Similar idea, right? Like, you don't necessarily want to blunt stress responses if you're trying to elicit adaptation, because that's the same sort of mechanism. But to date, I don't think there's any evidence, although rhodiola will modulate and keep you in closer to homeostasis. Modulate meaning like it keeps you from getting way too high, way too low, things like that. That said, I don't think there's any evidence, but it's not been studied exhaustively either, that it will blunt long-term adaptations. Any comments?
I'm really glad I'm glad you mentioned that. So we do discuss both in rodent work and a little bit in human work, there is some support for antioxidant effects of some of the rhodiola compounds. But we discuss that issue, particularly not just from the, are there benefits of this side, but are there detriments? Because we know with very high dose antioxidant supplementation, we can compromise not only molecular signaling, but actual adaptations to exercise. So we do address that. We did not see evidence. With that said, one of our major future directions, in addition to the dosing, is the need for better chronic supplementation protocols that are adequately powered, which means big enough, which means they're expensive, but it is what it is. Trials that would allow this to be teased out over a longer period of time, because it's within the realm of possibility, both on the ergogenic or say ergolytic side, that these effects would take quite a bit of time to manifest, especially if we were looking at something like body composition or some aspects of performance that might be slower developing, particularly maybe in trained individuals.
Love it, man. I'm going to wrap us up here pretty soon. I feel like we've done a great job. I'm going to give you plenty of time to go into whatever stuff you want to get into. Maybe just really quickly, though. Also, sort of alert, if you got any questions out there, fire them away now, because I'm not going to keep, I know it's late for you and you got kids you probably just put to bed and you want to get to bed and all that stuff. I got mine out there.
Yeah, this is my 1 hour. This is my 1 hour free time per day. It tells you how much I think of you, Andy. That I'm spending my 1 hour free time with you here.
I know. Seriously, I appreciate it. Any papers that we uncovered where you feel like there's clear evidence it does not work? Any situation, circumstances, either has a clear detrimental or a clear no effect, or we don't know yet. There. So what do we know in terms of the downsides from that perspective?
Yeah, so I would say it's interesting. So we've talked about exercise performance so far. For those of you who want the details, we have other categories of exercise relevant outcomes. What's interesting, in every category, there were at least some glimmers of hope mixed in with studies showing no benefit at all. So for example, the ability of rhodiola to allow individuals to exercise at a lower heart rate, for example. There might be a study or two that would show this, and then several others that didn't. Same thing with muscle damage, inflammation, post-exercise, modulation of energy systems. There was some interesting rodent research supporting maybe benefits for resting glycogen concentrations and limiting use or kind of delaying depletion of glycogen during exercise. Some of that hasn't been looked at in humans, but yeah, antioxidant capacity. Lots of these outcomes, there'd be a study or two with some positive effects, and then several studies without any benefit whatsoever. And there's lots of reasons for this. We do have a table of all the studies, which sort of allows you to kind of find some of these common features. There are a number of potential explanations for why there might be discrepancies. Many of these studies are relatively small, underpowered. We won't talk stats right now as much as I would like to, but some of these certainly were underpowered. There might be some meta-analysis that comes out for some of these outcomes that would provide some clarity here. But again, I'd say it's interesting. The breadth of exercise relevant outcomes where there were potential benefits is interesting to me. Again, it was not overwhelming across the board where for every outcome there was a benefit, but there were enough in a broad enough category that I think it generally provides some level of support for the idea of adaptogen being kind of, resistance to stress in a broad capacity. And that's how adaptogens were, first defined in the literature. Yeah. So all that to say, the details are in the paper. There are many outcomes for which there were primarily null results with glimmers of hope. So it's something where I think certainly it'd be within the realm of being reasonable if someone wanted to try this. And again, that's why we provide recommendations. We're not saying definitively everyone should do this, but sort of if you're going to do this anyways, this is what we view as kind of the best protocol for this. Everything from getting a third-party tested supplement to knowing the concentrations of Rosea and celidracide, to how you approach dosing for different outcomes, all these things. So we really tried to make this available as a resource, not only to researchers, but to practitioners and individual consumers as well.
Yeah, and I think you did a great job of writing the paper where, again, I really do think any random person not in this field, not a scientist, could pick that paper up and read it front to back. I'm not saying you'd be as interested in all of the methodology parts of it or whatnot, but I don't think anyone would really have that hard of a time following the writing. It's very smooth and easy to read. Several questions popped kind of up about whether or not you and I have ever tried it. As I mentioned before, I've used it a billion times. I grabbed it off my shelf. I've got some right here. Again, I use Momentous in all conflict of interest disclosure. Like, I'm one of the main reasons they make it. I kept telling them for so many years, I'm like, you got to make this. It's, there's good research here worth making. Again, also, though, you do not need to take it. Like, you absolutely do not.
Let me say something there for anyone who's curious. Andy exerted zero pressure anyway. He was the ideal scientist. There's no study where whatever, Andy's like, Momentous won't like this, take it out. He's completely objective throughout the process. So just as an inside look at the research process, we declare any conflicts of interest because that's the honest thing to do, the right thing to do. We of course do that. But I can say from the inside, I think that played absolutely zero role in any aspect of the paper. So I think this paper turned out exactly the same way it would have, whether or not anyone had a conflict of interest related to rhodiola. So I just wanted to mention that. I myself have used rhodiola as well. I haven't in the last year or two, but for a long time when I was sort of mixing my own pre-exercise supplements, I would obtain kind of rhodiola and include it with a number of other ingredients in a multi-ingredient supplement. So diving into this certainly kind of made it resurface in my mind. I haven't started taking it again since then, but it's certainly on the list. I might have to cycle off some other things just to avoid some of the co-supplementation because, of course, just at an individual level, if you want to know if a supplement's working, it's useful to kind of test it in isolation when possible.
Yeah, as any scientist would, right? That's the process of science. You hold everything else constant, change one thing, and then see if it does anything else. Okay, man, I can go on and on and on. I would love to. Actually, like beyond thoroughly enjoying this. I think you're just crushing this. So anything else you feel like was super interesting, or you just feel like people would want to know the answer to? They're not going to go read the paper, but maybe you can catch them for a minute here. Anything else that jumped out as like, you just feel like you got to get out to the world here if this is the only exposure they have to this paper?
Yeah. I feel like we hit the high point, so I don't muddy the waters too much. Again, if you want more details on exercise performance or the exercise relevant outcomes, we have that. We have a big table of the 16 studies. We have summaries of each of them. So if you want the details, they are there. The main points I wanted to hit, I think we have hit, which is really related to that section 4 of the paper, that's sort of the practical applications, kind of the so what. So if you're not someone that normally reads peer-reviewed research, but you're interested in this, you could read that section alone and you should get a fair look at the outcomes we saw, more benefits for, less benefits for, and so on. Now, if you're a researcher, I'll give one plug. We do have a decently hefty kind of summary and future directions article. So if you're interested in rhodiola and you're wanting to conduct studies, we do try to set up what we believe are some of the important studies related to long-term use, actual adaptations to exercise, the dosing protocols we talked about. Again, this lack of clarity both on the strength and power side because we've sort of only used low to moderate doses or only used very high doses. So there are a number of kind of considerations there for maybe the few researchers on here if you want to conduct the next study. So when we update this article in a decade, we have some more good stuff to work on.
Yeah, no, I mean, you gave master students, doctoral students, maybe even some postdocs, man, you gave them some layups. Like you basically outlined some of the stuff for them right there, which I think these would be fantastic projects to go and do. And to be really also clear, somebody asked me this question sort of earlier a couple of days ago, I think, when we published the paper, and they said, like, I thought you weren't a huge supporter of cortisol modulators. I'm not a supporter or unsupporter of anything, and neither are you. This is an interesting topic. We felt like there was enough research out there to conduct a review. It hadn't been done yet, and so we did it. And the results are whatever they are. Nothing, supplementation-wise, is a panacea, meaning nothing works for everything. As much as we love creatine and caffeine and some of the really standard ones, they don't all work for everyone. They don't all work for every scenario. And anyone who would ever try to convince you that basically any supplement does so is it's probably reason to question their authenticity. And so while you and I think it has nothing to do with us. You just look at the literature. It's pretty clear that there's some potential benefits of rhodiola. You could certainly perform at an extremely high level in whatever it is you're doing exercise without it at all. But if you were to want to try it for whatever reason, I think there's merit there, and there didn't appear to be much downside. Again, within the scope that we saw, there's other considerations, maybe digestive or hormonal or other things, but within our scope, seemed to be a potential, let's either neutral or potential positive effect is, I think, a fair way to characterize what we found based on the 16 trials of human exercise performance that were included in our analysis. Is that a fair summary?
I think it is a fair summary. And you're right. We haven't tested rhodiola in every other ingredient you could combine it with. That hasn't been done. So there's certainly some questions there that remain. But I was curious, Andy, if you have any perspectives from the practitioner side on when you might implement this or might not. And if that's too big of a topic, you certainly don't need to touch it. But I know you do have a lot of experience with this, and we focus kind of just on the literature here. But now we have to, take this literature and apply it, in certain contexts the way maybe it should be applied.
Yeah, no, man. I've used it a bunch. Oddly enough, and this sounds super weird, but we've had a lot of success with rhodiola as a testosterone aid, if you will. Now, you could jump through a lot of speculation there on why. I don't necessarily know why, but doing exactly what you said earlier, controlling everything else, adding in rhodiola, we saw a huge benefit many, many, many times. There's obviously a testosterone-cortisol ratio. If cortisol is extremely high, then that's going to suppress towards cortisol or the testosterone, all that. That's not important. I don't know why. It could be total fluke, could be the fact that we're doing typically lots of other things as well, but independent of those things, when we held it constant, it still saw a pretty big benefit there. So in general, when I typically think about it, there are other ways to improve exercise performance. If you're looking for muscular endurance, right? I'm going to start with the classics. Like we're obviously going with caffeine and creatine and potentially a beta-alanine or a sodium bicarbonate or, like something like that has a lot more research on it. Where we typically tend to use rhodiola are people that have maybe a need for greater adaptogen regulation, right? So they are struggling or have other signs of homeostatic dysfunction, and we kind of want to put them there. Also, people who tend to respond to it pretty quickly. If we are generally of the belief that, like, if we're not seeing any benefit, we don't like to take supplements, like just for the sake of it. So if we're getting a big response, or they can't take beta-alanine or tried it and didn't like it, or they don't respond well to caffeine, or when all of those things come off the list, then we start going, oh, okay, well, another way to get to a similar idea is rhodiola. And so that's typically how we think of it, but we're not jumping this over on top of caffeine, creatine, and of course all the basics, a good training program, good sleep,
Right.
like all that other stuff. This comes way after all of those things.
Right. No, fantastic. Yeah, great summary. I was curious to get your perspectives on that.
Yeah, dope. Cool. Anything else you got to get off your chest about our paper here? If not, then people who want to follow more of your stuff, see more of your papers, go read all your research. I'm sure you got it all up on a website. Obviously, they can follow you here. Again, science communication is pretty much exclusively what you do through your social media. You just started back on Twitter, so they can hop and follow there if they like easier access to the links to the papers and all that stuff. But
Yes.
Is there any other place they can follow along your lab or the stuff that you're putting out, that stuff? Because you are insanely productive. If you guys are into human performance research, man, there's just not many people in the world pushing more stuff out there than Grant.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm really fortunate to have a great team of PhD students, master students, undergraduate students, collaborators such as yourself. So no, primarily
if they're a student too, give them that jam too. They want to come work in your lab, all that stuff. What they want to volunteer, intern, give them the whole spiel.
I hesitate to say this. I might be recruiting one PhD student for fall 2024. Frequently adding master students, undergraduate students. I'm out in West Texas and Lubbock, Texas. I love it here. Some people don't, but if you love West Texas or are willing to consider West Texas, it's a great school. Our department has good resources.
Where it is. If you love this stuff, man, like I went to Central Indiana for 4 years.
Hey, yeah.
Like you go find a way to love the area, to do the type of work you're doing and be involved in this type of stuff.
It won't distract you from your work. There's corn, cotton fields, everywhere. It won't distract you from your work. You can focus. But no, so yeah, Instagram and now Twitter, I'll share our research there. I have a personal website, just my name, granttinsley.com, that has more information about me, my lab, some of my other activities. And you can get in touch with me through social media or on my website. But that's pretty much all I have to plug. Nothing too crazy.
All right, you don't got a book out there, no training courses, nothing like that, right?
Not yet. When I get called up to the big leagues like you, then I might start having some of that.
No, sir. You're not going to find me doing books anymore. That's it. That's a one and done.
Yeah.
I'd much rather do, honestly, I'd much rather do science and do cool projects like this. It's just far more interesting.
Oh, yeah. So I'm with you.
Dope. Cool. We got that. Grant and I got another project coming out. Grant was instrumental in our intermittent fasting project. That paper is being written right now. And so we'll probably have to hop back on when that thing comes out. We got some other papers in the hop too, right? Some that are in review coming back. Tainted Supplements one with Andrew, right?
Yes. Good one. Andrew Jagam led up. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you'll see more Grant. We'll be around. Hit him up if you need anything. Check out his website. Other than that, man, can't thank you enough for the time. I think this was fun for me, man. And I don't know if anyone else enjoyed it or did. If they did, maybe we'll consider doing another one if they let us know. But if not, I don't care because I had a great time.
Hey.
So.
Yeah, we got to chat, so that's great. I had a good time too. So, but yeah, thanks to everyone who listened, and great talking with you, of course, Andy.
All right, peace out, my man.
Awesome. Take care.